Hello Irish fans, welcome back to another moment in Irish history. Today we're not going too far back in time. Today we're going to talk about 5 years ago about this time. Notre Dame was making an important decision who would be their next athletic director. It turned out to be Jack Swarbrick, who they picked in the middle of July. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what the atmosphere was like when they were trying to decide who would be the next guy to replace Kevin White.
Yeah, it's funny because you saw about 24 names and you never saw really Jack Swarbrick come up. You always think of former Notre Dame athletes like a Moose Krause or a Dick Roosevelt or a Mike Wadsworth. And here's Jack Swarbrick, a 1976 graduate. Wasn't in any varsity sports, but became a very prominent figure in the NCAA, brought in Indianapolis. He worked for a law firm, Baker and Daniels in Indianapolis, but he was also a mover and shaker in sports. They're bringing the Super Bowl to Indianapolis, the Final Fours, and even the NCAA headquarters. So extremely well connected, but it was like, who's this? And usually that's how it's been many times at that athletics director's position.
Yeah, it seems like, I guess we were saying, Moose Krause might be the most recognizable name for people who enjoy Notre Dame history, but beyond that, there's nobody who was really a shoo-in for the job in the more recent hires.
And the job has changed so much, the job description itself, because when Moose was here, it was so much of a public relations aspect to it like that. He was just such a renowned name and beloved figure. Not that they aren't necessarily today, but I think when you start to get to Dick Roosevelt, he never had athletic administrative experience, but he was a very prominent banker, and when you're dealing with a multi-million-dollar budget there, you better know finances, and you look at the legal ramifications. He's Jack Swarbrick, a very successful attorney. When he was introduced at that job, one of the first things he said was, we're on the precipice of some major changes in the NCAA, and you won't probably even recognize the industry in about 10 years from now. We're halfway there, and you can just see all the changes, the conference realignments and television packages and everything else that are occurring right now, that it's like, yeah, it's changed dramatically. And he's been at the forefront of it, and he said Notre Dame has to be a leader and a visionary and proactive in that, rather than just sit back and see how things fall into place.
Right, the new media stuff was a big deal back then, and I remember he seemed to be right on top of that. He's now 5 years in, halfway to that 10-year mark, like you said, and so far it seems like he's been a success on the job. Obviously one of the major points there is that the football team is winning, which was Kevin White's biggest downfall. No matter what you do, if you're not winning football games, there's not much that's going to make you a successful athletic director.
It's like we always joke about here. I mean, when the football team is winning, the food tastes better, everybody looks nicer, the weather is not as bad or anything like that. And that's Mike Wadsworth once said about the athletic director's position, it's sort of like an iceberg. People see like a very small percentage atop the water, but it's really what's underneath. There's so much layer and so many other things underneath that no one sees. But what everyone sees is the football program is thriving. If it's flourishing, you're a heck of an AD.
So 5 years in, fair to say that the Brian Kelly hire is still the biggest and most important decision Swarbrick's made?
Oh, of course. Everything is going to be defined by what happens with the football program, especially when you make the hire there. We've always kind of joked about it. If the football team wins a national title and you have a losing record in all the other sports, it was a successful athletics year at Notre Dame. And that's, I know it's maybe a little misguided and unfair, that's the reality.
All right, that's it for this time around. Thanks for checking in again for another edition of the Irish History. Check in next month for what's coming up in June.